Okay, everyone, you made it. I know we went a little bit long, but it is the foundational teaching for the series. So hopefully, fingers crossed, it won't be so long the next couple of times. We shall see. But yeah.
I've got a question here, Michael, from Tong. Did I misunderstand this? So this is about fallen spiritual beings having a physical experience, not physical beings trying to become spiritual. Did I misunderstand this? And this is not about us humans, or is it about all people? And then it's got to do with understanding being formed of the dust, being formed in the physical, and then the breath of life, being the spirit and the soul. Yes. In other words, you're inserted. So it's an interesting question. The statement is that you're a spiritual being. In other words, you're inserted into the flesh. And so the whole reference is that you're already spiritual. I see somebody's actually answered that. Yeah. You're a spiritual being that's been inserted, or you've gone through the matrix and you're in the time domain now. So now the test is about trying to understand the reason for the physical experience, and the test having to legitimize the sovereignty of the creation with the creator. So there's a big picture playing out here. So the statement isn't about that you're not having a physical experience. It means that you've already been created. Your existence is outside the time domain. You've been inserted. And so we often think, and especially the unbelieving world, that all you have is the physical experience. And so therefore I've got to try to ascend to being spiritual. And so the point being is that if we're to have a Hebraic understanding, is that no, we've actually been inserted and given physical flesh for a time, for an experience. And the reason for that is to not try and become spiritual. The reason why you exist, or the breath of life, is that you are. And you've existed outside the time domain. That's why he says, I knew you before the foundations of the earth, before you could even be inserted. So hopefully that makes it a bit more clear. The opportunity or the reason for the test is more now understanding the why, not the what's of the matter.
Yeah, in one of the Psalms, it actually refers to man being the literal Hebrew literally says that you are a skin bottle. And so there's something that's that the skin, the flesh, is actually the vessel that the spiritual being is put inside. And so as a result of that, some of the guys in my stable, we refer to each other as skin bags, and we say to each other, oh, you're one of my favorite skin bags. But we're playing on this fact that the Hebraic understanding is you are a spiritual being, and you've been put into this fleshly vessel, this skin bottle, this bottle of leather is the Hebrew behind it. And so that's what Curtis is really getting at. Like, think of yourself as a spiritual being, and you've been put into a bag of flesh, essentially.
And that's why, it's why it's an interesting question, and a good question, in the sense that much of the unbelieving world that hasn't really made it to the place of even a full boss of Elohim, this is why they try to seek out spiritual experiences, because they actually have an identity crisis in the spiritual. And so that carries on into an identity crisis in the physical. They don't know what they are and why they're here. And so they seek out these matters in their own efforts. And then, of course, all the folly that goes with that.
This is why you see in the so-called mystery religions this idea of transcendence. You know, you're to go up a level, and actually the biblical understanding is that you were already, that's where you actually came from. You've been demoted and we're returning to something. That's the biblical understanding.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. She gets it now. Awesome. Well, in that case, I see Sean and Charlene is first on my hit list, and that's definitely not a Sean I can see there. So I'm going to assume Charlene.
It is Charlene. You might have pulled a Paul and Eusebius thing and put Sean to sleep a little bit, so he's resting right now. That was a long one. So I had a couple of questions, both of them probably conjecture a little bit on your part, but so actually there's three, but the first one I think is short. So, can someone, I think I heard you say that, is it possible to kind of go back and forth a little bit? Like you might be in Phobos and then find your way to reverence, and then something happens and fall back a bit. Is that possible even in this time domain, so to speak? Is that part of the journey a bit?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And to be honest with you, we will talk about that a bit more in the upcoming parts. But yeah, it's a part of the journey and the struggle, because once you have the full boss of Elohim, we're going to fail inevitably on the reverence journey. so we actually do, but at least you've got that to fall back to. See, if there's no full boss of Elohim, look at the state of the world. And they just say, whereas we can, at least we fall back to that. And it's like, okay, we can come back. And I tried to use the journey. Maybe I should elaborate it a bit more on the so far so good parable. She can still make mistakes now. She's learning reverence, right? So every now and then, and in the live presentation, I gave more the example of, sometimes I even play with her right now to this day, where I'll sneak up, I'll start walking towards her with my hands in the air, making growling noises, and she'll look at me and she goes immediately, she'll start to return to full boss, but in the end, I couldn't do that with MJ. I could go up to her and she'd just be looking at me like, why are you acting like an idiot? Whereas Shofar, she can still, if I do it long enough, she could still all of a sudden start to wonder, maybe he's lost it, So definitely what you're saying is absolutely a part of that reverent journey, but eventually it leaves. And we do reach a place where we've matured enough in reverence where the need to fall back on that isn't in play anymore. But most certainly the journey along the way, absolutely is that. And so when we taught it live at Sukkot, I actually made that point you just raised, that actually that can absolutely happen.
Okay.
And we'll delve more into that next week when we give another parable. Okay. We'll leave that for the parable for next week. It will kind of bring in a bit more detail into your question.
Okay. Sounds good. And then another part of that being, so thinking about the tests and the journey and the many tests, are there, so again, conjecture, but do you think that there are certain tests that each person eventually has to pass? For example, I mean, you think of Yeshua in the wilderness, he had at least three that we know of, temptations that he had to pass through, so to speak. I know I've heard you mention the pride of the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life. Like, are there specific tests that at some point in our journey we're all going to have to overcome? And the reason I'm asking that, for example, I was thinking of a pattern, and maybe it's because we're personally going through this right now, that one of them seems to be almost like a financial provision test. And do you think that having everything stripped away at some point is just part of that journey? Like, I'm looking at, because you had said that Phobos is a necessary part of the journey, and when we get everything stripped away, we're in Phobos a little bit for a while. Because I'm looking at all the patterns, and I started writing it down. I'm thinking of the Israelites who left with nothing but what they could carry, and they had a bunch of jewels and a bunch of treasure that they had, been given favor to carry, but it did them no good in the wilderness. They totally still had to rely on Yah. I think of Job, who lost everything. I think of David, who was, in caves for a decade or more. I think of Moses, who was taken out of the palace and put out in the shepherd's field. I think of Joseph, who was the favorite of his father with his, fancy coat and all the things, and stripped down and, in a prison. I think of the disciples who said, I just reading my list here that I was thinking of, who said, we've left everything to follow you, because they did. They dropped their fishing nets, they dropped everything and followed him. And then they're like, well, where else would we go? You have the words of life. I think of Yeshua, who told the rich man to sell your possessions and give to the poor. And then he encouraged them that no one who left homes or land or people or, mother, father, will not be rewarded for that. And then it takes me all the way to the end, the mark of the beast, so to speak, in the shadow picture, at least the buying and the selling, that you won't be able to do that. And the phobos that could, right up to the very end of that's, it seems like a test. So am I catching a pattern there, or is that just some people will go through that and some won't? Or
So two things very quickly. The first one, Yeshua was also finally tested in the Garden of Gethsemane. Not my will be done, but yours, Father. That was ultimately his final test. So people missed that one. That was his great and final test. But as to what you're raising regard having everything stripped away, I think it actually goes back to the point where we started the Q&A, that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience and not the other way around. And having everything stripped away from us I actually believe, is there to teach us that principle. We're told to store up our treasures in heaven, not on earth, where moth and rust do destroy. If we forget that we are spiritual beings having a physical existence, if we think we're physical beings, we end up putting our faith in physical things, and even it can go as far as, we end up putting our faith in our works, in our ticking of the boxes, we're missing the spiritual weightier matter because we're focused on the what's, on the fleshly things. And part of having everything stripped away from you, it not only does it on a simplistic level force you to rely on Elohim, but it reminds you of that fact that, Yeshua would say, I have other bread that I eat of, and the disciples, where do they go? They go, well, he's got a load of physical bread. And Yeshua saying, guys, it's not about the bread baskets. It's about, the spiritual food. And so I think it's more having these things stripped away from us is actually to help us understand that ultimately we are spiritual beings, and that we shouldn't be focused on these fleshly things, these temporal things that will eventually pass away. And it all points to, is the work being done on our hearts, on the inside of the cup, or are we too focused on the outside of the cup? To put it really simply.
Darlene, in your pattern part of your question, it's exactly what he's doing. If you actually look at the fulfillment of the fall Moedim, it includes the wrath of Elohim. And it's exactly what he's going to bring it. He brings it back to Phobos or Hatat as the final act to allow those to have a chance to repent before the gates close and the return of Messiah. So it's absolutely what it's that reset to get people back. In other words, if it's like your last measure to go, you would do everything. If you went straight to Phobos every time, you would be abusive, if that makes sense. If you tried to run a household like that, or a marriage or anything, think of it in those terms. But if all else fails and judgment's coming and he's returning, you actually see this in the Fall Moedim. He enacts Phobos or Hatat one final time to allow people the chance to repent. So indeed, the pattern is there. And in fact, it finishes with this final act of love in the wrath of Elohim at an extreme level of Hatat. It's something so terrifying that many of us hopefully are blessed not to witness. It will be that severe.
And thus, The trials we
ju-
go through now is why we should be grateful, because if
We're
pass those
yes,
tests,
let's
we have to kind of
avoid the
test our
wrath.
tests. Yeah.
Yeah. As the disciple says that we, count it, we're blessed to escape the wrath, because that final act of phobos by Elohim will occur on earth. Yeah, and it's necessary.
And you mentioned this thing of, does everyone have to go through certain tests? Like, rather than thinking of it, you must go through this, you must go through that. I think it more of a thing of, what is it going to require to get us all to a specific place? And that would be the reverence. Like, what is it that's going to take us to be heavenly minded? For some people, strip away their finances. For others, strip away their friends. For some people, strip away their church environment. For some people, all of the above. But it's all to take all of us to the same place. And so, as Curtis said, let it be that it only takes what we're experiencing now, as opposed to the full Moedim. May it be that it only takes, say, your finances as opposed to all of the above. But ultimately, everyone will bear their own cross or their own, stake. The question is, what is it going to require to get you to that place of repentance? And for some people, it's more than others.
Mm-hmm. All right. My last question is, I don't know if you can answer it. Probably not. I hear you guys say often, like, what went down before creation, what went down. And I hear those hints of whatever happened. That's why we're here, being tested, or perhaps being brought back to a reverence that we lost somehow. So my question, 2 questions. Will we wake up to that in this time domain, or will we not realize that till he comes back? Like, or are we starting to wake up to it because we're starting to have these conversations, even because the things that you guys teach or talk about, there's people that I wouldn't even invite to watch it, because I don't know, it would probably, because early in my Christian journey, I wouldn't have even entertained what you guys are saying. I wouldn't have even understood. It would have gone right over my head. And now when you show those scriptures, I see what you're seeing. So is he starting to wake us up to that now? Will we understand what we did or didn't do before this time domain while we're in this time domain? That's the first part of it. And then the second part is kind of this question I've asked my husband and children a billion times, and it's probably just conjecture, but what is it that's out there outside of this time domain? For example, in Revelation, I think it's 22, where it says, it's describing all at the end, and we will rule and reign forever with him. And so who or what are we ruling over, or what's out there? Or are we supposed to not know that yet? Is that the no eye has seen, no ear has heard piece of it?
Charlene,
those are just kind of fuzzy questions.
they're the questions that we hunger and thirst about. We will next year be going into a very special series, one of which is maybe finding the time to start sharing a bit more on what you're asking. For many, many years, there's only been breadcrumbs sown and things like that. And as we get closer to the end of this age, it's like the Father's releasing us to talk a bit more about these things. But one of the things you need is people to go on the journey, like you said. We don't advertise the channel or the community as such. We wait for people to be invited or led. And one of the reasons for that is so that we're not casting pearls before swine, as a matter of speak. I don't want to be calling people swine that, just because they're looking deeper. But what I'm meaning is that there are things that we are starting to address, things that the prophets longed to be in our place, to have certain revelation revealed. And so you're asking questions, they're good ones. Yes, there is both literal answer in the word, and then there's our conjecture based on those literal answers that are in the word. But to even see what's in the word means our eyes have to be opened. And so you're making a statement of something that, we're going to slowly start to look at as a community, but we have to grow in our reverence in order to even hear these things that our eyes may see and our ears may hear. And so you're kind of asking something that's not really for this in this yet, but it's the questions we need to be, I think he's putting in the spirit of his people who are really wanting to know more. And so this, the fact you're asking it is, I'd say, is something that can only come from his Ruach, because you're longing to look at it in his desire as opposed to your own, you know, making him in your own image. And this is what it's all about. You're actually truly going, well, what is this all about? Even at a higher level. So, but it's things that are coming. But they are the things that I think he's putting in his people that are longing to ask and look into more and more now. And so we're finally starting to talk about these things a bit more openly.
Right. Because, when I have conversations with people from the old Christian world, we talk about the fact that we never even heard about the millennial kingdom, let alone what comes after. It was all, he's going to come get you early and you're going to go to heaven and that's it, we're going to heaven, which I don't even, that's not even accurate. And
No.
so,
It's just
I'm just
it's a
saying,
big
it's like, it's
question.
been so absent, all these conversations, it's been so absent. But these questions, the questions are in there. And I remember one of Michael's teachings, I think it was called The Why of It All. I mean, that was just like filled such a hunger, because there's got to be more than just the what. It is the why. What is he wanting? What is he desiring? Why would he do all of this? Why would he put us through all of this? Why any of it? So the why questions are the ones that are that I just yearn to hear, or to just ponder on. And I'm not saying that you guys have to give the answers, and I don't know, maybe we don't have the answers, but I think they're just worthy of the struggle and the wrestling. And I hope that it pleases him that we would want to know his heart, the why. So.
I think it does. We just need to establish certain foundations and have it like we're doing with this series. It's very important that we understand the fear of Elohim before we look deeper at these matters. Mm-hmm. It really is. Like, we're doing this for a reason. To go there without this foundation, it's maybe not fruitful. Yeah. I'm not saying that with you. I'm saying that just overall, the responsibility to, a wider community and whatnot, we're just having to be very careful that there's certain things that are really in the foundation of our journey, so that we can talk about these matters a bit more openly, because it's maybe not the wisest thing to do it without these things really being understood, these sorts of things. But no, your hungering and thirsting is, I believe it's of the Ruach. So we'll keep going.
And that's why the way we've gone about it, we have put breadcrumbs out, and over the years, the breadcrumbs have got bigger, if you want to call it that. But for a long time, it was like, not yet, not yet, not yet. Just leave the breadcrumbs. But like Curtis said, next year we're thinking, I think we've got to go there. But we need the proper foundation. But again, we believe that Yah is wanting to take his people to a deeper understanding. It's just, how do we go about it responsibly?
Mm-hmm. And this all leads to the unanswerable question. We'll talk more about that next year. I only have one question left in my faith. And I've stared at that ceiling for a long time now. And it's only on the other side that it will ultimately be answered.
But thank you guys so much. I appreciate your depth and the place to ask these kind of questions. I remember you talking about the heretic hat, and, just having, with great reverence, the ability to ask the untouchable questions sometimes is very refreshing and helpful, even if it's just to point us back to first this. We're not going there till this. I appreciate that about you guys. So thank you.
It is exciting, though. It excites the spirit. So, and it will add life. So thank you, Charlene.
Let's go with Andrew. I'll ask you to unmute there.
Shabbat shalom.
Hey, Shabbat shalom.
There we go. How are you guys?
Good, Andrew. How are you?
Doing good. I just had a question on Genesis 9, the passage you brought up about the animals, because I've been going back and forth with coworker and a classmate on it. So, why is it that after the flood now we can eat of the animals, whereas before we couldn't? And then we see sacrifices before the flood with Cain and Abel. And so like some of the sacrifices, the priest would eat of them, or like with the fellowship offering, they'd eat of the sacrifices. So really the question is about like why the change, because that's what he's asking me, because like he's going through scripture from Genesis all the way through, and his thing is like, oh, has there been a change? And Yah makes the distinction there of not eating any meat with the blood in it, the life in it. So I was just curious about that, because he's basically saying, oh, Yah's saying we can eat anything, so that would include anything unclean. It's kind of like, I guess my question. I'm just thinking about that.
Yeah. So what's really interesting is we see a change of condition from pre-flood to post-flood. One of them is the introduction of eating meat, and definitely a change of state in the animals in that they have a fear and a dread of mankind. But what we also see is on the other bookend, in the millennial reign, we see that the animals will no longer devour each other, and that the lion will eat straw like an ox. And so we get that change of state as well. And, personally, it's the way I think of it, it's almost like we're going back to a pre-flood state almost. Is it going to be exactly the same? I don't know. But what we do know for certain, there was a change post-flood, and there's a change going into the millennial reign. And I think the two marry up each other, especially when you view it chiastically. And so there does seem to be a change. You also see the change post-flood with the lifespan of mankind. It sharply drops, like within 3-4 generations, you go from like 900 years right the way down to 200, and then eventually even lower, right? We're now 100 if you're lucky, sort of thing. Like by David's time, 70, 80 if you've had a good run, sort of thing, right? And so there's physiological changes that have come about because of the flood. People will conjecture as to why that is. I don't get too lost in the details, but there's an interesting rabbit trail to go down. But like, there seems to be changes. Now, regarding the whole eating of everything, again, you have to use that within context. What is considered food? Like you astutely pointed out, there was an understanding of clean and unclean before the flood. So there was an understanding of clean and unclean. And so for me, it's a case of when you're saying you can eat of it, it's on the foundation of understanding clean and unclean, because that was already there prior to the flood. If I said to you, open the fridge and eat whatever you want, and I happen to be keeping dog food in there, you wouldn't eat the dog food. There's an understanding of what food is. And I believe that's going on when it says you may eat of everything. Like the context is food, and what is food.
Yeah, like, so he's just trying to say we can eat anything unclean, and it's like I'm trying to explain how no, there's a distinction there, but like Noah understood what was clean and unclean when he brought the animals on the ark. And then also the word that's used there for eat of everything is used also when Yah says, you can eat of all the fruit, in the garden, but then he makes the distinction of not eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So was he saying that we could eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil there, or is it, so yeah.
Andrew, just think of in terms of helping your friend, that what got reestablished with and what we see in the Torah and in the Levitical sense of resetting the barrier, is that there became a need to re-implement this, if that makes sense. So it's like, it's not, It's not that Yah is doing different things. It's just we lose understanding or knowledge, and so he's resetting it and doing that. And so the reason why he's even asking is because he needs to actually read his Torah again. That actually happened after the flood, and then we see that this was given because it was needed for them at the time. Eventually these things got lost, right? And so, or maybe taken liberty with, or maybe just outright transgressing, but it got reestablished. Okay, I'm going to reset this, and by the way, just so you know, we're going to reissue what food is again. But what happened at the point of post flood was very much relating to, and he even went on to the ark, 7 of the unclean, 7 of the clean and the unclean, because this was going to be used in sacrifice, the clean. There was the understanding of it. Now, what was actually of the clean used to eat before the flood? We don't fully know all of that. It's not really, and we mustn't take that understanding and then relate it completely to sacrifice. You can sacrifice without eating something. Right. So there are all sorts of matters here in the big discussion, but really when it comes to your friend, he needs to re-go through the Torah. That's the reason for the Torah, is he has to be explained again what is food and what isn't. And so that's the reason why he's asking.
All of it. So he started reading, with the Charlie Kirk thing. So, I encouraged him to go through from Genesis.
Yeah, it's a fair question. But all he does is he has to learn what food is again, because he's lived in a world that's forgotten what food is. That's all that's actually going on.
Okay.
Yeah, but they knew what was food and what wasn't before the flood, and there was sacrifice involved. What they actually ate in relationship to that which was clean, this can be a much different discussion. So we just got to be careful that Elohim's whole plan of redemption is constantly dealing with us in a fallen state. He doesn't change at all, right? It's just we're going through these moments where he's resetting, where he's dealing with things, then he's re-explaining. The Torah is actually a part of the re-explaining post-flood. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, even for me, it's curious, like why now that we can eat of the animals, or he's giving that instruction now. Like I'm thinking, like, what does that point to, or why? The why of.
Yeah, we're assuming that before the flood, they were eating the clean animals that were relating to sacrifice and stuff, as being, well, that's what they were doing. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it's like, well, no, wait a minute. We're seeing something that's been established post flood. So what was being eaten and not eaten pre-flood is a very, very, very different discussion, even if it was clean. The sacrificial system does not denote eating. Right. So it's not a part of it. We're bringing in something pre and post flood discussion. We're post flood now. So all your friend is going, okay, well, you need to now hear what Elohim says is actually food out of that instruction. Right? Because the instruction's there now. So now it's being defined in Torah. And so this is what is clean for you to eat. And of course, science backs that up. We know that regarding clean and unclean things, and its health for the physical body. But yeah, again, we tend to put Elohim in these different places where he's like, no, he's the same all the way through. It's us just going through these things. And so and that's the reason for the Torah. He's actually asking the question. I've had to say to somebody, you're asking the question that requires Torah. Let me take you back thousands of years, because they were needing it too at that time, and so they need it today. But instead, we tend to throw it away as opposed to actually take the instruction, if that makes sense. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that was just my little question there. So thank you.
Yeah. Bless you, brother.
All right.
And Shabbat Shalom to you. Last, but definitely not least, we'll go to Stephanie. I'll ask you to unmute there. Hang on. You'll have to unmute there, Stephanie. There we
Okay.
go.
Got it?
Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Oh, there's my son. Say hi. Okay. Okay, so I'm not feeling very well. I'm going to try to articulate this the best way that I'm thinking it. So my question is more along the lines of like the mediator and discipleship. So the heart of this, I understand, is that it points to Messiah being our mediator. And all of us have access to him now through the Ruach, and he is our ultimate like help to get us through the discipleship process, right? But so, okay, so in the shadow picture with MJ and Shofar, right? Shofar comes into the picture and MJ is there. They're both dogs. Curtis is not a dog. Curtis is a human, but they're both dogs, right? And Shofar has MJ to walk and demonstrate side by side dog behaviors to kind of help navigate the process of going through the transformation from fear to reverence. So, but MJ did not have that, right? MJ came into the picture. There was not another dog there to go side by side and help her. She had to come to those terms on her own, right? Both of them had Curtis, and both of them eventually achieved the same end result. But
Well, Shofar's not there quite yet, but she's getting there.
So my thinking here is that like so Moses, for example, Moses had access directly to Yah, could go into the presence, but he did not have another human walking through everything with him, whereas the people in the wilderness had Moses to go with them and lead them and guide them and all of that, right? Or so like in today's world, like the firstborn, right? The firstborn comes in, the little one has the firstborn to look up to and can kind of show them like, okay, kid mindset, we do this, mom likes this, mom doesn't like that, you know, that kind of thing. But the firstborn has to kind of figure those things out on their own, and all they have is, you know, the parents. So my thinking here is there are times where we find ourselves in very unique trials. So in this process of discipleship, there's not always someone there who has experienced what you're going through that can say, like, I've gone through this, you know, to step by step go through it with them in a way where they understand it because they've experienced it, right? So my question here is like, in the fear process of going from, you know, the fear to the reverence, like, can you speak to like the differences of that dynamic where in one sense you have, you know, the hand holding, walk you through this step by step, but what about like for those that don't have that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's the ideal is that we have a mediator. So I like what you said with, you know, Moshe was acting in that place, right? So MJ was Shofar's Moshe in that sense, right? I'm playing the father at this point, right? So
first kind of winds up being the one that becomes the mediator for someone else. And we see that play out, like even with the firstborn, you know, firstborn didn't have it. So now the is going to mediate for the younger. And the same with MJ so far.
Absolutely. The firstborn in any family situation always is going to wear things. If you have a good firstborn sibling, that good firstborn sibling should disciple and should help the others coming after it, right? If it's a proper mediator. And so therefore, in theory, it's not always the case in real life, but in theory, the children or the siblings coming up with a good firstborn maybe don't have to go through all the same things the firstborn did the hard way, plus get there quicker. right? And so
Right.
that's that mediator discipleship example coming through. So you're very correct in that. And so Moshe was dealing with that for the house of Israel, right? And he's dealing with, but then what would happen, what would come after that was a whole Levitical priesthood and everything else, and hopefully it will allow others to not have to go through what Moshe did. Remember what Moshe endured. He had to
Right.
give up everything. He spent 40 years before he was even, like, you see, he went through a lot to
And
be
it was
used.
really heavy for him to carry that,
Yeah, huge. And even if you look at my little example with the parable, Shofar in no way endured what MJ did.
Right.
The price she paid for Shofar, but Shofar is so much more advanced at the exact same age that I showed you in the pit, and that was my point. She's way ahead of where MJ was at 3 years old, right?
Right.
But what MJ endured, what she overcame, what she participated within, Shofar is the fruit
Right.
of it, right? And so do I look at MJ? Well, Shofar got, MJ was not where Shofar was at 3 years old. And then you look down on MJ, or is it, no, I look up to this beautiful animal that actually overcame much greater levels of trust and everything else, and then ended up in this place. I have no doubt that Shofar will get there, but she's no MJ yet. But she is farther ahead on the curve at the same age, if that makes sense. And this is why discipleship and walking with one another, like you see the dynamics in a family situation with the firstborn, that they should be helping the siblings, and it's a shame when that's not the case, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, you're spot on. You got it. Exactly what.
So I'm
Exactly.
just like the fear process, though, for the one that doesn't have it, like the process of going from the fear to the reverence, like how is it the same exact process? Does it look different? Like for either, do you understand what I'm trying to say? Like,
I know what you're trying to get at. This kind of goes back to one of the questions that Charlene was asking, and do people have to go through certain things to get, and it's not about what actual tests have to go through, but what is required to get them to that place. And when I zoom out at the plan of redemption, is that Yah wants his people to get to a particular place. Some will make it, some will not, and so the end goal, the hope, the desire is that not only do we go from phobos to reverence, but there'll be those from reverence that will actually end up at that bridal place. And again, not all will make it, but the option is there. Like the wild card in all of this is personal sovereignty. That's the thing that's going to go, will you make it? Will you not? Because, in the parable of the sower, there's nothing wrong with the seed. There's nothing wrong with the rain. It's the ground that it falls on, and it's our job is are we going to till the ground or not? So whether you have discipleship, whether you don't have those that have gone before you, the goal is still the same place. The process is easier if you've got those to give wise counsel into your life. But if you don't have it, it's not impossible. Curtis and I's relationship, I've got a donkey that's gone before me, and I've been able to not endure some of the things he's had to endure because I've been able to listen to his wise counsel. Here's the difference, though. Curtis has a line of sight. I still believe to this day that because he's had to overcome certain things at a greater level without the wise counsel that I was offered, his line of sight is greater. And so there's this really interesting thing because sorry, Curtis, to put you on the spot, but one of the things Curtis has said to me before is, I wish I had what you have now. And what he meant by that is wise counsel and someone that had gone before him. You know, Curtis is like, why did I have to learn this the hard way? And I always say to him, well, the ball had to start rolling somewhere, right? And you're where the ball started to roll. But here's the other side of that coin. His line of sight, it still astounds me to this day. Like, and I used to think, how? And I think it's because of the level of overcoming. Like, I may have been able to get to certain places and understandings quicker because of the counsel I had, but it meant that the level at which, like, that what was required was less, and with that comes less line of sight. And so it's not that one is necessarily better or worse, they're just different. Like, we get into this mode of thinking, well, is it better? Is it worse? And when we think this way, we're looking at it from a time domain perspective. And actually, when we zoom out, the important thing is, did you get there? You know, Did you get there?
Yeah.
And that's why it's the first shall be last, the last shall be first. We're crossing together, you know,
Right.
and so it's not one is better than the other. It's more, this is what it takes. And if we don't value it, this is why you see the principle of eldership in Scripture. That's why there's 24 elders. In fact, he's actually doing it. You know, going forward, he's carrying that same principle. Yeah, there's going to be 24 MJs sitting around the throne, right? Like there's literally these principles for us to do, but it's the point is the covenant on our heart, right? You know, like okay, Michael's being gracious in that, in what he's saying in one sense. On the other sense, it's not comforting, you know, when he says, well, somebody, you know, better you than me, you know, sort of thing on one hand. But on the other hand, there's a great joy that when you see, like, and it doesn't comfort me, because I can tell you a number of times I sit there and I go, you know, why did they get it so quickly? You know, I would say things, you know, and what I went through to understand something, you know, and then I've had, you know, fellowship, I'll keep it with Michael and I, but, you know, I'll be saying something and, you know, Michael's seeing it and I'm thinking, why did I go through a bunch of stuff in order, you know, and then it just becomes about, you know, a pity party, right? You know, I've had a few pity parties over the years. But in the end, you start to take joy just in, let's all get there, you know, let's all go. And we're all going to overcome in different areas and in different ways at different times in our lives. And one thing's for sure, though, maturing in reverence is only a process where we're in a place of repentance. We can go through things and not be in a repentant place. And it hasn't grown us at all in reverence or anything like that. And I've gone through things in my life where if I had entered repentance quicker or sooner, and it had helped to do so, perhaps it would have looked a lot different for me too. It doesn't make anybody any more special or better than anyone else, and it doesn't demean anybody's journey. It's just at the end of the day, his model is discipleship. And if we value those that have gone before us, it not only can save us a lot of angst in life, if we can listen to it, value it, and move forward, but it can actually grow us to a place we may not have gotten to otherwise as quickly or maybe at all. And that's what Michael is saying. It's possible that we don't get there. And this is why when I see people abusing the discipleship process and walking with one another and not valuing that, you know, they're not actually valuing this. It's grievous because, you know, when Michael and I first met, Michael valued it, but I can't put that in him. That's a sovereign thing to value something. He's in a repentant place. You know, he's got a lot of knowledge and whatnot. What is it that he's valuing? And so this is why when we get a chance to walk with each other in ways, we want to get to know someone's journey and then to value that, because nobody can overcome all things in all matters. But as a body, as a wider community, I'm not sure there isn't anything this community hasn't overcome. And Michael and I may not have overcome everything there is to overcome, but as a body, if we can learn to value this, then suddenly we've got somebody in the body, that goes, you know what, this brother or sister really has walked in a place I haven't. I don't know what it's like to experience something, right? And Michael's had to do that. I've had to do that. We just say, but this is who you should talk to, because they actually have overcome in this area, and so it just applies with anyone. And this is why it's an eldership, not a elder, this is why, and this is why ultimately when it comes to, we believe, the great white throne judgment, there's going to be what does a righteous judgment require? Because not even Messiah in the flesh experienced all matters and overcame all things. Do you see what I mean? So what makes the judgment righteous? And this is why we've got a great thing we believe Scripture is indicating as to what's going on. And this all links back to some things we'll talk about more next year. But just for now, it's just the principles of learning reverence. And we believe that discipleship, mediator, all these things are there in Scripture, because it actually cannot, how I've learned reverence off others who have gone before me. And that's what I'm saying. Like it can be a part of the picture and the journey. I've also learned reverence the hard way.
Right.
I'm sure you have. I'm sure Michael has. We all have.
And another thing is that sometimes, almost having that discipleship and accountability in play has helped me remain in a reverent place. Again, we're fickle creatures in our fallen state. We very soon forget, right? And every now and then you need that gentle reminder of, hey, like Curtis was telling me when we're discussing Shofar So Good and things like that he's caught MJ literally not saying to Shofar, but Shofar, no, don't do that. Just trust me, don't do that. It won't go well for you. it helps us. And I know I've been in that place, where every now and then Curtis would have gone, Michael, just keep this in mind. I'm like, oh boy, if you weren't there, I would have just, off I go.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That kind of puts it all into like you're saying, to take a step back and to see the whole part of it, because when you're going through something and there's not someone, step by step, you wonder sometimes,
Yeah.
All of it is required. Like Curtis said something just then, Messiah in the flesh, he overcame, but he did not have to overcome every possible situation. And to give look, Messiah was never deceived. He never had leaven. He never fell into spiritual adultery, but he overcame. He overcame the flesh and so forth. But that means there's an aspect to Messiah's existence here on earth that he'd be able to speak to it, but you need someone that has fallen into deception, has had leaven, and then overcome. Now you've got both sides of the equation. And so, this is why all positions are required. When Curtis, I say the ball had to start rolling somewhere, and he's like, yeah, but it's like his line of sight is needed. Yeah. All positions are needed for not only judgment to be righteous, but for accountability to be righteous, for discernment. Do you know what I mean? All these things need to come together so that everything is covered.
Right. That makes a lot of sense to why, people say, why do I have to go through this? Why everybody experiences such different trials and some of them are really drastic, it's some really hard stuff. And it's just it doesn't make any sense. Why am I going through this? But when you put it in that context of it's all required, it makes it make more sense, you know?
Just some of us are bigger donkeys than others, and so I always say Michael was just less of a jackass than I was, and so he didn't have to, go around the mountain and do things the hard way. But Stephanie, you'll know in your own life, and just look at your own life and look at the things you've gone through, right? And those bits that you have overcome, you now can help someone else, right? There might be areas still to overcome and areas that you didn't, but there'll be those areas in your own trials and things like that. And if we think about this as a body sense, if we actually tap into this the way Scripture's indicating, as a community, as a body, which we're starting to in the wider community, there's nothing we'll lack. Does that make sense? If we start to actually value this and appreciate, not just, oh, we're the body of Messiah. No, we actually start to believe it and act like it. Because if that starts to actually occur, I believe it's an incredible witness, more than we can possibly comprehend, if that makes sense. And it can be achieved through no single individual. It is achieved in a body sense. But I think Hasatan's gone to great efforts to hide this from us, just what's actually available to us if we actually learn how to walk as a body. And so we're trying, to get there. So yeah, that's why when I look at the example of MJ, I see. Again, I use the animal partly because it doesn't make it so personal with people's families and children and things like that, right? It's able that we can able to relate outside of that, unless you're a cat person, which then you'd probably want some cat parables. But cats are a bit trickier because they don't seem to care as much. But I love cats so dearly. Actually, I think they're neat animals. But the whole pack orientation of the dogs lends itself to these sorts of things. But the greater analogies are the kids and families and moms and dads and everything else. But it just helps keep it one set removed, because sometimes things can be a bit close to home when things aren't going the way we want sometimes, or maybe we weren't raised in an environment that was as healthy as others, So we're just trying to be respectful of these things too, hence the parables,
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate it. Like this, you guys really brought it home. I love what you're saying about the body and like the aspect of networking. Like if we all know each other and we, can understand what each other has gone through, then when it comes to reaching those that are outside and being able to maintain that process of, reaping a harvest, even so to speak, like it just makes it's, we see this so often, especially in like Christianity, where you've got one guy at the top and he's making all the decisions, and it's his church, it's not y'all's church, and I think because that's so prominent, we kind of get used to this, like, oh, there's only one way to have a mindset about moving forward, I guess I should say. But it's a big fat lie. It takes all of us. I love that you guys explain that. It makes a lot more sense that way.
Well, we're doing our best, and we appreciate the question, but we just got to help each other. Again, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. Apparently we're supposed to cross as one body, not fragmented all over the place. So we're trying to make sure that we all cross together here, and none are, the real discussion does not happen who's the greatest in the kingdom. The real discussion is, let's share in each other's burdens, thus fulfilling the law of Messiah, move forward. And like I say, as a wider community, there's so many trials and tribulations and so much overcoming that has occurred, that the tragedy would be is if it all came down just to one person, and so this is why discipleship and a body actually is not just, nice analogy. It's actually a truth. And so we're doing our best to try and move towards that. And quite frankly, a religious system doesn't like that. And it's just the way it is. and they didn't like it in Paul's time. They hunted him down, and Paul had to go through things the hard way. I'm sure he lamented to Timothy all the time. I'll bet you anything. There's one person I'd love to talk to, and that's Timothy, because he would have saw things and heard things and lived things in a way, and, poor Paul, I mean, the whole religious system, his eyes are being opened to it. He doesn't have them to go to. He's having to have Damascus Road experiences. He's doing everything the hard way. He's done all sorts of things that he shouldn't have. And, Timothy gets to sit there and probably at nauseum, imagine poor Timothy up late at night just listening to Paul's lamenting, he would have, but Timothy had Paul. And look what Timothy could be used and go on to do. And then look what Timothy did for others, right? And then we're all here today because of it, right? And just because Paul had to learn the hard way and be directly dealt with by Messiah in order for him to get it, doesn't take away all the things he had to overcome. He just didn't have what he implemented, right? Just like Moshe didn't have what he would eventually be a part of implementing. But then, Aaron and Caleb, the priesthood, would go on to do these things to help them. And so these principles are always there. The danger is if we stop at Paul or we stop at Moshe, because they didn't. Paul went on to foster a body. Moshe went on to foster a house of Israel. Do you see what I mean? They didn't stop and say, oh, I'm Moshe, you shall listen, or I'm Paul, you shall listen, right? They just did things the hard way. They were bigger donkeys than perhaps the ones that would come that they would be able to feed into. But those donkeys, Yah loved. He loved Paul, he loved Moshe, but I would tend to think Moshe had to go through what he went through because Moshe needed to, and same with Paul, and that's not a slight on them. It's just what they did with it was the greater honor to Messiah and to his people, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Makes sense. Okay. Well, this is really awesome conversation. I'm glad I raised my hand. I almost did it not feeling good, but I was like, I have to ask my question.
Well, we've gone over an hour today. My goodness. Whose fault's that?
Curtis's.
It's Michael.
Thank you,
Stephanie. Thank you.
Guys,
I've gone over an hour. Gee whiz. Okay.
Curtis, last word. Over to you.
Let's continue on our journey, and may we all help each other in the reverence space, because if we can do that, apparently in Scripture, it's and in His Word, it's a good thing. So let's continue this journey together, and if we can all get to the reverence space, then we have to help each other in this space. And no one's greater than anyone else while we do this.
All right. Well, everyone, we'll leave with the blessing. Yah will bless you, and He will guard you. Yah will shine His countenance upon you, and He will be gracious to you. Yah will turn His countenance toward you, and He will grant you shalom. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your Shabbat if you've still got some Shabbat left, and we look forward to continuing the journey next week. Until then,
Shabbat shalom, everyone.